You're tuning in because you want to get a grip on the big picture fast. You want to know what's really going on without getting lost in all the weeds.
Yeah, cutting through the noise.
Exactly. So let's cut to it. We're taking a close look at Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev's recent trip to China, April 22nd to 24th.
Right.
Now, on the surface, maybe just another state visit, but you put it against, the backdrop of the ongoing China-U.S. trade stuff.
The tariff war, as some are calling it.
Right, that. Plus, things like joint China-Egypt military exercises.
Well, it starts to look pretty significant, a moment in a shifting global landscape.
Definitely more than meets the eye.
So our goal today is to dive beneath the surface of this visit, pull out the crucial insights, and, connect the dots in a way that makes sense, maybe even surprises you.
Well, what immediately stands out, I think, is the timing. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced it, standard procedure, maybe. But if you look at the bigger global currents, it's highly likely that countries like Azerbaijan are very aware of these shifts, even if they don't shout about it.
Exactly. Even without the grand public statements, they're paying attention.
Okay, let's zoom in on this tariff war then. We've heard trade disputes before, but the analysis we're looking at, it paints a much more intense picture, calls it a financial war. What does that really mean in practice?
Think of it as economic pressure, but maybe taken up a notch. The analysis points to a U.S. approach of, what's the phrase, showdown-style extreme strategic blackmail.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, in areas beyond just traditional security, economics, diplomacy. It's broad, trying to exert influence. But what's really notable here is that China isn't just, taking it.
They're pushing back.
Reportedly, yes, with a comprehensive and sharp counterattack. That's the language used.
And here's where it gets interesting. You might expect this to ramp up militarily, but the analysis suggests the U.S. is actually showing, signs of defeat on this front, facing multiple challenges.
That's the assessment presented. Multiple fronts, yeah. Meanwhile, China is seen as actively making strategic moves.
What sort of moves are we talking about?
It's described as befriending distant states while addressing those nearby.
Okay.
So the befriending distant states part, that means engaging with big players, the EU, Russia, countries in the Middle East, expanding that network.
And the addressing nearby part, it's not aggression, is it? Sounds more like keeping lines open.
Exactly. The analysis mentions China proactively talking to neighbors, Vietnam, Malaysia, Cambodia, about regional security stuff, keeping them in the loop.
Keeping them informed, yeah.
Precisely. And economically, at this sort of non-military level, China seems ready to activate what's called minimum economic internal circulation.
And a circulation upgrade with ASEAN.
Yeah, imagine like strengthening economic ties within their own region, maybe reducing reliance on external systems.
This brings up a really fascinating point from the analyst about China's underlying advantages. It's not just strategy, but like inherent strengths. Geography, for one.
Well, this is interesting. The comparison of river systems and climate. China's major rivers flow east-west, aligning with good climate zones near that 30th parallel north.
Right.
Seen as a huge natural advantage. For agriculture, population centers. Almost a beneficial setup, naturally.
And the contrast is?
The analysis contrasts this with the north-south rivers and more varied terrain in India, Europe, Russia, the U.S., suggesting those geographies are maybe less naturally unified for that kind of large-scale development.
And beyond the physical landscape, the market itself is a big factor.
A huge factor. A massive, unified, stable market, 1.4 billion people. That's an incredibly strong economic base.
Plus the political side.
Right. Stable political system, consistent policies, powerful manufacturing, growing tech sector, strong military. It paints a picture of a very self-sufficient and influential nation.
Okay, let's focus on Northeast Asia for a sec. This idea of minimum level of Northeast Asia economic integration, what might that actually look like?
Well, the initial stage, the analysis calls it a cold start. Could involve North Korea maybe joining this circulation upgrade as China potentially kicks off its minimum economic internal circulation there.
So starting small.
Starting relatively small, yes. Then it could expand. The 10+1 with ASEAN, eventually the 10+3, adding Japan and South Korea.
And the temperature metaphors. Warm start, hot start.
Yeah. If Russia joined willingly, that's seen as a warm start. If Japan and South Korea come fully on board, that's the hot start. It indicates this growing level of regional economic cooperation.
And there's significant movement on the financial side, too, isn't there? Seems aimed at providing an alternative.
Yes. That recent agreement under the Chiang Mai Initiative Multilateralization, the CMM, at the ASEAN+3 meeting. That's key.
especially with Japan and South Korea involved.
Their active involvement suggests a strong regional push for, more financial stability and cooperation. The analyst actually interprets this as the beginnings of a WTO v2.0.
A new framework.
Essentially, yeah, a new framework for economic interaction that could challenge the dominance of the U.S. dollar system, a direct response maybe to that U.S. tariff war.
So, putting it all together, shifting economics, regional integration President Aliyev's visit to China suddenly looks, well, much more strategic.
It really does.
And the analysis even suggests it might be a kind of probe, possibly orchestrated by Turkey. Why Turkey?
Well, the close ties between Erdogan's Turkey and Azerbaijan are key. Plus, look at Turkey's recent economic moves. That huge interest rate hike, 350 basis points, up to 46%.
That's massive. Signals pressure.
Huge pressure. It ended their brief easing cycle, add domestic political issues, concerns about Syria, the whole Greater Israel idea. Erdogan's facing a lot, not unlike, say, the pressures Trump faced, perhaps.
So the thinking is Turkey sees China's growing influence.
Sees the writing on the wall, perhaps.
And uses Aliyev's visit, this close ally, to sort of test the waters with Beijing, explore options.
Exactly. The analyst suggests Erdogan understands that navigating this complex world might mean engaging more with China, given its, growing footprint everywhere.
Okay, adding another layer here. There's also that joint military exercise, China and Egypt. Civilized Eagle 2025. Happening right around the same time as Aliyev's visit.
Yeah, the timing is suggestive, let's say.
Seems too coincidental to ignore.
And what's really noteworthy is the analyst's take on it. They see this exercise as showing the PLA Air Force becoming a proper strategic Air Force. Meaning capable of long-range, even ultra-long-range deterrence, which has clear implications for, well, Israel and the U.S. and the Middle East.
And doing it with Egypt, an African nation, shows reach.
That transcontinental deployment is a big signal. It highlights this expanded capability.
So it's more than just showing off planes. It's about strategic capability.
Precisely. Long-range strikes, exerting influence across continents, maybe setting up security partnerships like the 2+2 dialogue they have with Malaysia.
And the specific jet mentioned, the J-10S.
Oh yes, the two-seater. Interesting choice. Could be a cost-effective trainer for Egypt, maybe paving the way for more advanced Chinese tech later.
Or even drone operations.
That's hinted at too. The potential for future manned-unmanned teaming.
The analyst goes further, though. Suggests Egypt might be looking at adopting an entire Chinese military combat system. What would that mean strategically?
Well, if Egypt fully integrated a Chinese system, think about the access they'd gain. Military intelligence, familiarity with advanced strike capabilities.
That's significant cooperation.
Very significant. Between China and a key Middle Eastern player like Egypt, it would definitely put strategic pressure on the U.S. and Israel. And the analysis notes, other nations in the region feeling similar pressures might view that quite favorably.
Okay, let's circle back to the U.S. tariff war. Trump was claiming countries were asking for exemptions, right? Using that as leverage.
Yeah, leverage to get them to limit manufacturing ties with China. That was the idea presented.
The analyst saw this as a push towards an anti-China tariff alliance, a kind of global encirclement.
That's the interpretation, yes. Aiming to build a strong financial firewall against China.
But according to this analysis, it seems to be backfiring. What went wrong with that firewall plan?
Well, the necessary groundwork apparently wasn't laid. Particularly the shifts in the Middle East, the Saudi-Iran reconciliation, the Syrian situation that weakened a key part of this intended structure.
So Aliyev visiting China instead of joining some anti-China bloc
is seen as evidence the tariff war isn't working as intended. It's kind of ironic.
And all those visits by European leaders, other global figures to China.
The analysis interprets those almost as a subtle message back to the U.S. administration, a kind of demonstration.
Like countries trying to keep their options open, not wanting to be pushed into a corner?
Exactly that. Don't push us too hard. The argument is that China's strong counter-response set a global precedent. It showed that even the U.S. could be, well, significantly challenged in this financial arena.
So there's an implicit warning to others.
Seems so. Substantially joining an anti-China tariff alliance could bring significant negative consequences from China's side. That's the takeaway suggested.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly. Ukraine. There was a report about the U.S. considering neutral status for the area around the Zaporizhia nuclear plant under Washington's control as part of a deal.
Right. The analyst suggests Russia might actually agree to something like that if things get tough. Why? To reduce nuclear risks, maybe drive a wedge between the U.S. and Europe.
while seeking concessions elsewhere, presumably.
Of course.
Yeah.
But consensus on that specific, tricky issue could signal that a broader Ukraine ceasefire agreement might be getting closer.
And looking beyond Ukraine, the analysis touches on potential future conflict in the Middle East, with China as a bigger player.
The prediction is that any future major conflict there will likely involve more parties, and China's influence is definitely seen as growing. There's talk of a possible U.S. troop withdrawal from Syria.
A tactic, maybe, to pressure Saudi Arabia via Turkey?
Could be. The analyst seems a bit skeptical, suggesting the Saudis might just turn to China for mediation instead. Or the U.S. talk of withdrawal could be aimed at pressuring Russia to, help contain China's growing influence in the Middle East. It's complex.
Finally, let's touch on U.S. internal politics. The analysis highlights something unusual. 3 former Democratic presidents, Obama, Biden, Clinton, all publicly criticizing the Trump administration's policies recently.
Yeah, that's described as rare, even unprecedented perhaps. It does suggest mounting pressure on Trump.
Along with removing Navarro from that tariff team.
Right. The analyst sees this as the Biden camp signaling maybe a need for a different approach towards China, even if the overall competitive stance remains.
And Trump's reaction, releasing JFK files,
Suggests he views it as purely political condemnation. Yeah,
Eh.
lashing out.
There are even questions raised in the analysis about, well, how the U.S. military may react if Trump ordered certain actions, say, in the Persian Gulf.
It's a serious point raised. The analyst cites past examples, figures like Mark Milley, the South Korean president's impeachment, suggesting orders might not be followed automatically in a crisis.
Implying a need for international warnings.
A strong emphasis on the need for the international community to warn against nuclear blackmail or playing with fire, especially with advanced weapons now in play.
It connects back to the idea that the West isn't really positioned for a full showdown with China yet, not before dealing with Russia.
That's the assessment. And that China won't be blackmailed by conventional means and shouldn't be at the nuclear level either.
So the bottom line on China's response to the tariff war, according to this analysis, the Trump administration backed down from a major security confrontation.
And ended up in an embarrassing situation, is how it's put. China, meanwhile, is portrayed as maintaining strategic calm.
Sticking to their plans.
Exactly. Continuing with their own long-term strategy, avoiding drastic moves unless faced with something absolutely irreversible, like a strategic adventure from the other side. The long-term advantage is seen as lying with China if they maintain this course.
The analysis finishes with a look at Trump's business history. Bankruptcies, comebacks, attributing success to, well, blackmail tactics.
It suggests a pattern where creditors end up needing Trump to succeed so they get paid back, so they accommodate him. It paints his approach as often relying on creating high-stakes pressure.
So as this deep dive shows, President Aliev's visit wasn't just a handshake photo op. It's embedded in this incredibly complex, interconnected global situation.
Absolutely, so many moving parts.
For you listening, the key takeaways are really about these shifting power dynamics, the challenges to long-standing dominance, China's multi-layered strategy, and what it all means for different regions, which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Considering all these interconnected factors, what do you think might be the most significant long-term consequence of this period of intense global realignment? Or perhaps, how do smaller nations, like Azerbaijan, even begin to navigate these increasingly turbulent international waters?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Definitely something to keep thinking about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We really encourage you to keep exploring these vital issues.